There are lies we tell to survive. And when those lies become the only truth we know, everything falls apart. I'm going to tell you the story of Danielle Reed and Veronica Sterling, an art restorer who crashed a VIP party on the Upper East Side, and the billionaire who claimed her as her wife. It started with a misunderstanding. Richard Donovan, the most powerful businessman in New York City, asked if they were together. And Veronica, without hesitation, took Danielle's hand and said, "She's my wife." What began as a convenient lie transformed into something neither of them expected. Silent mornings, gazes that burned too hot, an attraction impossible to ignore. But Veronica carried a past that threatened to destroy her entire empire. A secret named Lucy Morrison that Richard uncovered, and that could expose the truth about their fake marriage. This isn't just a story about lies. It's a story about two women who pretended to be in love until they stopped pretending, about masks that fall, about vulnerability, and about the courage to choose real love over appearances. Stay with me until the end to discover this story. See you soon. Veronica's hand gripped hers so tightly that Danielle felt her knuckles crack. It wasn't a gesture of affection. It was a warning, a silent command that said, "Don't say anything. Don't contradict me. Smile." And Danielle, trapped beneath the crystal baccarat chandeliers and the stares of 50 millionaires sipping $1,000 bottles of champagne, did the only thing she could: obey. Because 10 minutes earlier, a man who smelled of Cuban cigars and power had pointed at the two of them and asked with a crooked smile, "Are you two together?" And Veronica Sterling, the most powerful woman in that room, who owned half of the Upper East Side, had answered without blinking, "She's my wife." Now Danielle was trapped in a lie she didn't understand, holding a stranger's hand, while her heart beat so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it over the live string quartet. It had all started 4 hours earlier. Danielle should never have been at that party. She was an art restorer, spending her days with fine brushes and ancient varnishes, bringing life back to forgotten paintings in the basement of the Museum of Modern Art. Her world was quiet, ordered, predictable. She wore jeans stained with oil paint and cotton shirts. She didn't know the difference between Louboutins and regular shoes. And she definitely didn't belong at a mansion on the Upper East Side, where guests arrived in Bentleys and Maseratis. But her friend Morgan, a luxury event assistant, had begged her. "I just need you to come with me, Danny," Morgan had said on the phone that afternoon, her voice desperate. "The coordinator got sick. I need someone I trust to help me make sure the caterers don't screw anything up. Just 2 hours. I swear nobody will even see you." Danielle had accepted because Morgan had helped her get her job at the museum, because she owed her favors, because she thought it would be easy. She arrived at 8 p.m. at a residence that looked like something from European architecture magazines. Gray limestone facade, towering windows, a vertical garden covering an entire side wall. The kind of house that reminded you some people lived in another universe. Morgan met her at the service entrance, nervous and talking fast. Thank you," she said while handing her a tablet. "Just check that the servers follow the timeline. I'll be inside coordinating the string quartet presentation. If anything goes wrong, text me, okay?" "Who owns this house?" Danielle asked, looking at the double-height entrance hall ceiling. "Veronica Sterling," Morgan responded, as if that name should mean something to her. "Businesswoman, investor, owns art galleries, restaurants, real estate. Basically, if it's expensive and exclusive in New York City, she has a piece of it." Danielle nodded without much interest. Rich people always seemed like inhabitants of another planet. During the first hour, everything was routine. Danielle verified that the canapé trays came out on time, that the champagne glasses were served cold, that the floral arrangements, white orchids imported from Thailand, didn't wilt under the lights. She stayed in the shadows, invisible, just as Morgan had asked. But then she made a mistake. She needed to use the bathroom and Morgan wasn't answering her texts. Danielle walked down a side hallway, looking for a service bathroom, and came across a half-open door. Inside was a bathroom of black marble with gold fixtures. Perfect. When she came out, the hallway was no longer empty. A woman was leaning against the wall, holding a glass of red wine, and looking at her with an expression Danielle couldn't interpret. She was around 35, with short black hair cut in an elegant bob, perfect red lips, and wore an ivory-tailored suit that probably cost more than 3 months of Danielle's salary. There was something intimidating about her posture, in the way her dark eyes scanned her from head to toe. "Sorry," Danielle murmured, lowering her gaze. "I didn't know this bathroom was private." The woman didn't respond immediately. She just watched her for 3 eternal seconds. "Do you work for the catering?" she finally asked. Her voice was deep, controlled, the type accustomed to giving orders. "Something like that," Danielle responded, feeling her cheeks warm. "I'm helping a friend." The woman took a sip of her wine. "Do you like art?" The question caught Danielle by surprise. "I'm a restorer," she answered without thinking. "At the Museum of Modern Art." For the first time, the woman's expression changed. Something that might have been interest shone in her eyes. "Interesting," she said. "Most people at this party couldn't tell a Pollock from a paint by number." Danielle didn't know what to say. The woman was looking at her as if evaluating her, deciding if she was worth her time. "You should be inside," the woman finally said. "The collection I'm exhibiting tonight might interest you." I'm not invited," Danielle admitted. The woman smiled barely. It was a small smile, almost imperceptible, but somehow it made Danielle feel a strange warmth in her chest. "You are now," she said simply. And without waiting for an answer, she began walking toward the main salon. Danielle stood paralyzed for 5 seconds, debating whether to follow her or return to the kitchen. But something about that woman, her confidence, her magnetism, pushed her to walk behind her. The main salon was impressive. 20-foot ceilings, polished dark wood floors, and on the walls, artworks Danielle immediately recognized. A small Warhol, 2 Rothkos, a Basquiat that took her breath away. The woman in the white suit guided her to a corner where there were fewer people. "This is my favorite," she said, pointing to a medium-sized oil painting. It was a nocturnal urban landscape, with violent brushstrokes and colors that seemed to bleed into each other. "What do you see?" Danielle approached, forgetting for a moment where she was. She studied the texture, the technique, the way artificial light contrasted with organic darkness. "Solitude," she finally answered. But not the sad kind of solitude. It's deliberate, as if the artist had chosen to be alone. The woman said nothing for a moment. Then, "No one has said that before." Danielle turned toward her, and for the first time, noticed the woman was looking at her differently, not with the distant curiosity from before, but with something more intense, something that made Danielle feel a knot in her stomach. "What's your name?" the woman asked. Danielle Reed." "Veronica," the woman responded, and Danielle felt her brain make the connection with delay. This was the owner of the house, the billionaire, and she had used her private bathroom. I'm so sorry, I didn't know that." "Don't apologize," Veronica interrupted. "I like you, Danielle Reed. That doesn't happen often." Before Danielle could process those words, a man approached. He was tall, about 50, with an impeccable dark suit, and a Rolex that gleamed under the lights. "Veronica, darling," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I didn't know you'd brought a date." Veronica didn't move, but Danielle felt how her energy changed. She became more rigid, colder. "Richard," she greeted curtly. The man looked at Danielle with interest, and something in his gaze made her want to disappear. "And who is this charming young woman?" Veronica didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched for 2 uncomfortable seconds. "She's my guest," she finally said. "Ah," Richard smiled more broadly. "Are you two together?" And that's when it happened. Danielle expected Veronica to laugh, to deny, to clarify the misunderstanding. But Veronica did something completely different. She took Danielle's hand. "She's my wife," she said with a voice so firm it left no room for doubt. Danielle felt her entire body freeze. Her brain screamed for her to say something, to correct it, but the words wouldn't come out. Veronica's hand was warm, firm, and gripped hers with a force that was almost painful. Richard blinked, clearly surprised. "I didn't know you were married, Veronica." "There are many things you don't know about me, Richard," Veronica responded with a polite but sharp smile. "Now, if you'll excuse us." And without waiting for a response, Veronica pulled Danielle to the other side of the salon. Only when they were far from Richard, in a more private corner, did Veronica release her hand. Danielle finally found her voice. "What did you just do?" Veronica looked directly into her eyes. There was no trace of shame or doubt in her expression. "Saved us both," she simply answered. "From what? Why did you say I'm your wife?" Veronica took a sip of her wine, as if deciding how much truth to reveal. "Richard Donovan is a shark," she finally explained. "He controls the luxury real estate sector across the entire city. 6 months ago, he wanted to partner with me. I said no. Since then, he's been insistent. Too insistent. And lying about being married will stop him? It'll make him back off temporarily," Veronica corrected. "Men like him don't pursue taken women. It's bad for their egos." Danielle looked at her incredulously. "This is insane. I didn't sign up for this. I just came to help my friend with catering and—" "How much do you make as a restorer?" Veronica interrupted. The question caught her off guard. "What?" "Your monthly salary. How much is it?" Danielle pressed her lips together, feeling exposed. "I don't see how that's relevant." $3,500 a month, Veronica guessed. Maybe $4,000 if you're lucky. You work at a public museum. You live in a rented apartment in Brooklyn or the Lower East Side. You take the subway every day. Am I wrong? Danielle felt humiliation mixing with anger. Not all of us were born with money. No, Veronica agreed. But we can all take advantage of opportunities when they present themselves. What opportunity? Pretending to be your wife so some creepy guy leaves you alone? No thanks. Danielle turned around, ready to leave, to find Morgan and get out of this mansion of crazy people. But Veronica's voice stopped her. $8,000. Danielle turned slowly. What? $8,000 a month, Veronica repeated, looking at her with those dark eyes that seemed to see too much. Just to maintain the charade for 6 months. You appear with me at some events, dinners, galas. We pretend to be a couple. After 6 months, we divorce amicably, and each goes her own way. Danielle looked at her as if she'd grown a second head. You're completely crazy. I'm being practical, Veronica corrected. You need money. I need Richard and other sharks like him to stop seeing me as easy prey. It's a fair exchange. It's a ridiculous lie. Nobody will believe it. I just introduced you as my wife 5 minutes ago and Richard believed it, Veronica pointed out. People believe what they want to believe, especially in this world. Danielle shook her head, feeling how all this became more absurd every second. No way. Find someone else for your games. She started to walk away again, but this time Veronica followed. 10,000. Danielle stopped. Despite all her indignation, despite how absurd the situation was, that figure made her heart beat faster. $10,000 a month. That was more than double her current salary. She could pay off her student loans. She could save. She could stop living paycheck to paycheck. She turned toward Veronica slowly. "This is insane," she repeated, but this time her voice sounded less convinced. Veronica smiled barely. It was a small smile, almost sad. "Most things worth having are," she said. "Think about it, Danielle. Just 6 months. I pay you. You act. Nobody gets hurt. What if someone discovers the truth?" "Nobody will," Veronica responded with unsettling confidence, "because the only truth that matters is the one we decide to show." Danielle looked at her for a long moment. Part of her wanted to run out of that house, from that world of luxuries and lies. But another part, a part that scared her, was calculating. $10,000 a month for 6 months, $60,000 total. That would change her life. "One condition," she finally said, surprising herself. "We don't sleep together. No, nothing physical. We only act in public." Veronica nodded without hesitation. "Of course. This is just a professional agreement. And I want a contract, in writing, with all conditions clear." "My lawyer will have it ready tomorrow," Veronica promised. "So you accept?" Danielle closed her eyes, feeling how her life was dividing into a before and after of this moment. When she opened them again, Veronica was still there, looking at her with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. 6 months, Danielle said. "Not a day more." Veronica extended her hand. "Deal." When Danielle shook her hand, she felt an electric shock run through her arm. It wasn't unpleasant. In fact, it was quite the opposite. And that, more than anything else, should have warned her this was a mistake. But it was already too late to turn back. Subscribe now. YouTube prioritizes subscribers, and those who aren't subscribed miss out on future stories. That night, Danielle couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed in the apartment she shared with 2 roommates in Bushwick, staring at the cracked ceiling and wondering if she'd lost her mind. She had agreed to pretend to be a billionaire's wife. For money. What kind of person did that? But when she thought about the $10,000 monthly, when she imagined being able to pay all her debts, being able to save, maybe someday having her own restoration studio, the craziness started to seem less crazy. At 7 a.m, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello?" she answered with a sleepy voice. "Good morning, Danielle." Veronica's deep voice woke her completely. "My driver will pick you up at 10. We're going shopping." "What? Why?" "Because if you're going to be my wife, you need to look the part," Veronica explained in a practical tone. "You can't keep wearing denim jeans and Converse sneakers." Danielle felt a stab of indignation. "There's nothing wrong with my clothes." "I didn't say there was anything wrong. I said you need different clothes for public events. It's part of the job, Danielle. Or would you prefer we deduct your wardrobe from your payment?" "Fine," Danielle conceded through gritted teeth. "But I choose what I wear." "Within reason," Veronica agreed. "See you at 10. She hung up before Danielle could respond. The next 4 hours were a whirlwind. Danielle showered, dressed in her best, dark jeans and a white blouse, and waited nervously at her building entrance. At 10 o'clock sharp, a black Mercedes-Benz stopped in front of her. The driver, a middle-aged man in a discreet suit, opened the back door for her. Inside, Veronica was waiting, dressed in a cream dress and Chanel sunglasses. She looked like she'd just stepped out of a Vogue photo shoot. "Good morning," Veronica greeted as Danielle settled into the leather seat. "Did you sleep well?" "No," Danielle answered honestly. "I spent all night thinking about how ridiculous this is." Veronica smiled slightly. "It's normal to have doubts. But once you sign the contract, everything will be clearer." "Is it ready?" "My lawyer sent it this morning. We'll review it after shopping," Veronica said. "First, you need to look presentable." Danielle clenched her fists on her lap, resisting the urge to respond with sarcasm. She needed the money. She could endure 6 months of condescending comments. The car took them to Fifth Avenue, the most exclusive avenue in Manhattan. Stores with names Danielle could barely pronounce. Hermès, Louis Vuitton, Prada, Gucci. Veronica guided her to a small but elegant boutique. A saleswoman greeted them with a professional smile. "Ms. Sterling, so nice to see you again. Patricia, I need you to dress my..." Veronica made an almost imperceptible pause. "My wife. Something elegant but not ostentatious. Clothes for business events and galas." Patricia looked at Danielle from head to toe with an expert eye. "Of course. What colors does she prefer?" "Neutral tones," Veronica responded before Danielle could speak. "Black, gray, navy blue. Nothing too flashy." Danielle felt irritation growing in her chest. "I can speak for myself," she said in a low but firm voice. Veronica looked at her with an unreadable expression. "Then speak." Danielle turned to Patricia. "I like emerald green and burgundy, and I don't want anything that looks like a corporate uniform." Patricia nodded, clearly accustomed to dealing with tensions between clients. "Perfect. I have some pieces that might interest you." For the next 2 hours, Danielle tried on more clothes than she'd worn in her entire life. Silk dresses, satin blouses, perfectly cut pants, structured blazers. Everything cost more than she earned in a month. Veronica watched from an armchair, drinking espresso and giving occasional opinions. Most were neutral. "That color suits you. That cut is better." But each comment made Danielle more aware she was being evaluated, measured against a standard she'd never asked to meet. When they finally finished, they had 8 complete outfits, 3 pairs of heels, and a purse that probably cost more than Danielle's non-existent car. "Happy?" Danielle asked, as Patricia packed everything in rigid paper bags with gold logos. "It's not about happiness," Veronica responded. "It's about image. And yes, now you look like someone who'd be married to me." The words hurt more than Danielle expected. Not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. This was a transaction, an exchange of money for appearances, nothing more. When they left the store, the driver was already waiting. Veronica gave an address Danielle didn't recognize. "Where are we going now?" she asked. "To my apartment in Tribeca," Veronica answered. "We'll review the contract there and discuss the rules." "Rules? Of course. This may seem simple, but it needs structure to work," Veronica explained. "We need to be aligned on our story, how we met, how long we've been together, details people will ask about." Danielle nodded slowly. She hadn't thought about that. Of course she'd have to lie consistently. Not just act, but build an entire shared fiction. Veronica's apartment in Tribeca was spectacular. 25th floor of a glass tower, with panoramic views of all of Manhattan. The interior was minimalist but expensive. Marble floors, designer furniture, artworks that probably were worth more than the house where Danielle grew up in Queens. "Sit," Veronica indicated, pointing to a huge gray sofa. Danielle sat, feeling the soft leather mold under her weight. Veronica disappeared into another room and returned with a leather folder. "Here's the contract," she said, handing it to her. "Read it carefully. If you have questions, ask." Danielle opened the folder and began reading. The document was surprisingly detailed. Duration of agreement, 6 months. Compensation, $10,000 monthly deposited on the first of each month. Obligations, attend a minimum of 8 public events per month. Confidentiality clauses. Neither party could reveal the nature of the agreement. Early termination terms. There was even a section titled Physical Boundaries that specified, "Intimate physical contact is not required. Public displays of affection will be limited to holding hands, brief hugs, and cheek kisses when absolutely necessary to maintain appearances. Any additional contact must be previously discussed and mutually agreed upon." Danielle looked up. "This is very specific." "It needs to be," Veronica responded. "I don't want misunderstandings. This is a professional agreement, Danielle, not a game. What if one of us wants to end it before 6 months?" "There's an exit clause," Veronica pointed out. "With 2 weeks' notice, either party can terminate the agreement. But if you're the one who breaks the contract before 3 months without justified cause, you must return 50% of what you've received up to that point." Danielle swallowed. It was fair, she supposed. Veronica was investing in this charade. She needed protections. And justified cause? What qualifies? Harassment, abuse, any violation of the established physical boundaries, Veronica enumerated. Basically, if I cross a line, you can leave without penalty. Danielle nodded slowly. The contract seemed solid, clear, almost too professional for something so absurd. "There's something else," Veronica said, her voice becoming more serious. "Once you sign this, we're going to see each other a lot, not just at events. We need to build a believable story. That means spending time together, getting to know each other. We can't seem like two strangers who are acting." "What are you suggesting?" "Regular dinners. Maybe a weekend together so you can get to know my routine, my close friends," Veronica explained. "Nothing invasive. Just enough so that when someone asks us questions, our answers match." Danielle leaned back against the sofa, feeling the weight of what she was about to do. 6 months, she murmured, "and then we go back to being strangers." "Exactly," Veronica confirmed. Danielle looked at the contract one more time. Then she looked around the luxurious apartment, the impossible views, the life Veronica lived that she could barely imagine. $10,000 a month, 6 months, $60,000 that would change her life. She took the pen Veronica offered her. "Where do I sign?" Veronica pointed to the last page. Danielle signed with a trembling hand. When she finished, Veronica also signed, her stroke confident and elegant. "Congratulations," Veronica said, putting away the contract. "You're officially my fake wife." Danielle let out a nervous laugh. "This is still the craziest thing I've ever done in my life." "Give it time," Veronica responded with an enigmatic smile. "We're just getting started." 3 days later, Danielle moved in. Not completely, she kept her apartment and roommates, but Veronica insisted she needed a space at her Upper East Side residence. "If anyone investigates, and believe me they will, they need to see we live together," Veronica had explained. "It doesn't have to be permanent. Just that you have a room with your things, clothes in the closet, toothbrush in the bathroom. Details." So Danielle packed a suitcase with essentials and found herself being driven to the same mansion where she'd made the mistake of her life just 72 hours ago. The housekeeper, a woman about 50 named Maria, greeted her with a warm but curious smile. "Ms. Danielle, so nice to finally meet you," she said while taking her suitcase. Ms. Veronica asked me to prepare the East Wing guest room for you. Guest room? Danielle asked, feeling a knot in her stomach. Won't I be... She fell silent when Veronica appeared at the end of the staircase, descending with that natural elegance she always seemed to have. The East Wing guest room is spacious and has a garden view, Veronica said, as if reading her mind. My room is in the opposite wing. Privacy for both of us. Danielle nodded, feeling a strange relief. She didn't know why the idea of sharing a room had made her so nervous. This was just a professional agreement. Maria guided her upstairs. The house was even more impressive by day. Natural light entered through enormous windows. The air smelled of fresh flowers and expensive wood floor cleaner. Every detail screamed money and good taste. The room they'd assigned her was larger than her entire apartment. King-size bed with ivory sheets, a walk-in closet the size of a normal bedroom, a private bathroom with a marble bathtub, and multi-jet shower. The windows overlooked a meticulously maintained garden with a fountain in the center. If you need anything, just press the intercom button, Maria indicated. Dinner is at 8. Ms. Veronica expects you to dine with her every night you're here. Every night? Danielle repeated. It's part of getting to know each other better, Maria explained with a smile that suggested she knew more than she said. You're newlyweds, aren't you? It's natural you'd want to spend time together. Danielle felt heat in her cheeks. Of course, Maria, the driver, any of Veronica's employees would have to believe the lie too. It wasn't enough to fool strangers. They had to fool everyone. When Maria left, Danielle sat on the bed and looked around. This was her reality now, living in a mansion on the Upper East Side, pretending to be the wife of a woman she barely knew, lying to every person she encountered. $10,000 a month, she reminded herself. Just 6 months. She could do this. That night, at 8 o'clock sharp, Danielle went down to the dining room. It was a formal room with a dark wood table that could easily seat 12 people. Veronica was already there, sitting at the head, reviewing something on her iPad. You're punctual, she commented without looking up. Good. Danielle sat in the chair to her right, feeling strangely like a child called to the principal's office. A young server, another employee Danielle hadn't met, served dinner. Arugula salad with goat cheese, herb-crusted salmon fillet, and roasted vegetables. Everything looked like something from a 5-star restaurant. You didn't have to do all this, Danielle said. I would have been fine with something simple. This is simple, Veronica responded, finally setting aside her iPad. It's the dinner Maria prepares every night. They ate in silence for the first few minutes. Danielle noticed how Veronica ate with perfect manners. Small bites, napkin always in her lap, never spoke with her mouth full. Everything she did seemed choreographed. We need to talk about our story, Veronica eventually said. This week I have a charity gala at the Guggenheim. You'll come with me. People will ask how we met. Danielle put down her fork. What do we tell them? The truth is always easier to remember, Veronica said, so we'll use an edited version of the facts. We met at a party a year ago. You're an art restorer. I collect art. We had an immediate connection. We started dating discreetly. We got married 3 months ago in a private ceremony. Why private? Because there are no photos to show, Veronica explained. And because it fits my personality. I'm a private person. I don't post my life on social media. People will accept it. Danielle nodded slowly. It made sense. What about my family? My friends? Eventually, they're going to wonder why I never mentioned I got married. Tell them it was very fast, that you were in love, that you wanted to keep it private at first, Veronica suggested. Or better yet, don't tell them anything. The fewer people who know, the fewer opportunities for someone to discover the truth. I can't just disappear from their lives for 6 months. You don't have to, Veronica said. Just be discreet. Don't post photos of this house on Instagram. Don't mention my name in casual conversations. Live your life, but keep this part separate. Danielle took a sip of water, processing everything. This is more complicated than I thought. It is, Veronica agreed. That's why I'm paying you well. They continued eating. Danielle tried the salmon. It was delicious, of course, and tried to imagine what it would be like to live like this every day. Elegant dinners, employees attending to every need. A house that looked like a luxury hotel. Can I ask you something? Danielle said after a moment. Depends on what it is. Why don't you have a real partner? She asked, choosing her words carefully. You're beautiful, successful, clearly intelligent. There must be dozens of women who'd be interested. Veronica looked at her for a long moment. Something dark crossed her eyes. Real relationships require vulnerability, she finally answered. And vulnerability is a luxury I can't afford. Not in my position. What position? Being rich? Being a woman in a man's world who are looking for any weakness to exploit, Veronica said in a flat voice. Richard Donovan isn't the only shark in the water, Danielle. He's just the most persistent. In my industry, showing you have a personal life, a real relationship, is like painting a target on your back. So you prefer to be alone? I prefer to be protected, Veronica corrected. There's a difference. Danielle studied her. Beneath the mask of control and elegance, there was something sad about Veronica, something lonely. That sounds like an empty life, Danielle said quietly. Veronica smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It's a life that keeps me alive, she responded. And that's enough. The rest of dinner passed in contemplative silence. Danielle realized Veronica wasn't just a capricious billionaire playing games. She was someone who had built walls so high around herself that she no longer even knew how to let them down. And for 6 months, Danielle would have to pretend to be someone special enough to have crossed those walls. The following days were an intensive course in being Veronica Sterling's fake wife. Veronica taught her how to move in her world, how to hold a champagne glass correctly, how to make small talk with boring investors, how to recognize when someone was evaluating her versus actually being interested in her. Never discuss politics or religion, Veronica instructed during one of their training sessions. If someone asks your opinion on something controversial, smile and say, I prefer not to talk about work at social events. It works 90% of the time. What about the other 10%? Change the subject or pretend you see someone you know and excuse yourself, Veronica responded. The key is to be friendly but evasive. She also learned about Veronica's social calendar. Charity galas twice a month, business dinners at least once a week, gallery openings, high society events, an endless calendar of performances. Is it always like this? Danielle asked one afternoon while reviewing next month's calendar. Don't you ever have time for yourself? This is my time for myself, Veronica responded. My business, my contacts, my empire. All of this is who I am. It can't be all you are, Danielle objected. What do you do when you're alone, when nobody's watching? Veronica looked at her as if the question had caught her by surprise. I read, she admitted after a moment. Novels mainly. Historical fiction, sometimes poetry. Really? Danielle smiled. I didn't picture you as someone who reads poetry. There are many things about me you wouldn't picture, Veronica said, with a tone difficult to interpret. Friday of that week brought the first real test, the gala at the Guggenheim. Danielle put on one of the dresses they'd bought, A dark emerald one that fell just below the knees, elegant, but not ostentatious. She applied makeup with trembling hands, trying to remember all the tips Veronica had given her. When she came downstairs, Veronica was already waiting in the foyer. She wore a black dress with thin straps that made her look like a Greek goddess. Her hair was styled back in a low bun, and her lips painted a dark red that took Danielle's breath away. "You look good," Veronica said, examining her. "Emerald suits you." "Thanks," Danielle murmured. "You also look beautiful." Something changed in Veronica's expression. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but Danielle noticed it. "Let's go," Veronica said. "We don't want to be late." The Guggenheim was lit up like a beacon in the Manhattan night. The building, with its distinctive spiral architecture, gleamed under the spotlights. Dozens of luxury cars lined up at the entrance. When the driver dropped them off at the entrance, Danielle felt nerves hit her hard. There were dozens of people, photographers, society journalists, guests dressed in gala attire. Veronica must have sensed her tension because she took her hand. "Breathe," she murmured. "Just smile. I'll do the rest." And that's exactly what happened. Veronica guided her across the red carpet, posing for photos with natural confidence. When reporters asked who Danielle was, Veronica answered with a smile. "My wife." The word sent a shiver down Danielle's spine every time she heard it. Inside, the museum was spectacular. The Kandinsky collection gleamed under perfectly placed lights. Servers circulated with champagne and canapes. Men and women dressed by designers talked in small groups. Veronica introduced her to dozens of people: business people, art collectors, heirs to family fortunes. Danielle smiled, shook hands, said the right things. "How romantic that you met through art," commented a woman with more jewelry than Danielle had seen in her life. "Was it love at first sight?" Danielle opened her mouth, but Veronica answered first. "She challenged me," she said, looking at Danielle with an expression that seemed almost genuine. "Nobody else dares to do that." The woman laughed, delighted, and Danielle felt her heart beat faster. Veronica was acting, of course, but she did it so well that even Danielle almost believed it. When they could finally take a break, they moved to a quieter corner. "You're doing well," Veronica said in a low voice. "Better than I expected." "Turns out lying is easier than I thought," Danielle responded with a bitter smile. "You're not lying," Veronica corrected. "You're acting. There's a difference." "Really? What?" Veronica looked directly into her eyes. "Lies eventually catch up with you, but if you do it well enough, acting becomes truth." Before Danielle could process those words, a man approached them. It was Richard Donovan, the same man from the party. "Veronica," he greeted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And the lovely Danielle. What a surprise to see you here." "It shouldn't be a surprise," Veronica responded coldly. "I always attend this event." Right. Richard took a sip of his whiskey. "But seeing you with your wife, that is new. I must admit you surprised me at your party. I didn't know you'd gotten married." "There are many things you don't know about me, Richard," Veronica responded with the same sharp tone Danielle had heard before. Richard laughed, but there was something dark in the sound. "Apparently. How long have you been married exactly?" Danielle felt her pulse accelerate. It was a test. Richard was looking for inconsistencies. 3 months, Veronica answered without hesitation. "Private ceremony. Close family only." "How discreet," Richard commented, looking at Danielle. "And tell me, Danielle, what's it like being married to the most powerful woman in New York?" Danielle felt all eyes on her. This was her moment. She could ruin everything with a wrong answer. She looked at Veronica, who watched her with a neutral expression. Then she looked at Richard and smiled. "It's intimidating," she admitted. "But she's also the most fascinating person I've ever met. Every day I learn something new from her." It wasn't completely a lie. Veronica was fascinating, complex, contradictory. Richard studied her face for a long moment. Then he smiled. "How sweet," he said, but the tone suggested otherwise. "Well, I wish you both the best. Marriages like these, you never know how long they'll last." He walked away before Veronica could respond. Danielle let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. What did he mean by that? "That he doesn't believe us," Veronica answered, looking toward where Richard had disappeared into the crowd. "But it doesn't matter. He can't prove anything." "Are you sure?" Veronica finally looked at her. "No," she admitted, "but we're going to have to act like I am. If this doesn't deserve a like, I don't know what does." The rest of the night passed in a blur of superficial conversations and forced smiles. When they finally returned to the mansion, it was past 2 a.m. Danielle took off her shoes as soon as they entered, feeling her feet scream with relief. "You survived," Veronica said, also removing her heels. "First test passed. I don't know how many more of these I can handle," Danielle admitted. 23 more, Veronica responded. 6 months of events. You can do it." Danielle looked at her. Under the soft lights of the foyer, Veronica looked tired. The lines around her eyes were more visible. The mask of control had cracked slightly. "How do you stand it?" Danielle asked. "All that fakeness, those plastic smiles, those empty conversations." Veronica was silent for a moment. "I got used to it," she finally said. "When you do something long enough, eventually you stop feeling it's difficult. It just becomes what you do." "That sounds sad." "It is," Veronica agreed without emotion. "But it's my reality." They looked at each other for a long moment. Danielle saw something in Veronica's eyes she hadn't seen before. Exhaustion. Loneliness. A sadness so deep it hurt just to recognize it. Without thinking, Danielle reached out and touched Veronica's arm. "Thank you," she said, "for tonight, for guiding me, for not letting me fail." Veronica looked at Danielle's hand on her arm. Then she looked up, and there was something vulnerable in her expression. "You're welcome," she murmured. The moment stretched. Neither moved. The air between them felt charged, heavy with something Danielle couldn't name. Then Veronica took a step back, breaking contact. "You should rest," she said, her voice returning to its usual controlled tone. "Tomorrow we have brunch with my business partner. You need to be fresh." "Sure," Danielle responded, feeling a strange emptiness where Veronica's arm warmth had been before. "Good night." "Good night, Danielle." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Danielle couldn't help but look back. Veronica was still in the foyer, staring at nothing with that expression of loneliness that broke hearts. And Danielle realized with a start that this was going to be much more complicated than she'd imagined. Because she was starting to care. Really care. And that wasn't in the contract. The brunch with Veronica's business partner turned out to be more of an interrogation than a social meal. Her name was Ellen Caldwell. She was in her 50s, and she'd made her fortune in commercial real estate. She had that kind of sharp gaze that could see through lies like they were transparent paper. "So, you're Veronica's famous secret wife," Ellen said, while cutting her omelet with surgical precision. "How intriguing," They were seated on the terrace of Le Bernardin in Midtown, one of those places where reservations required 2 months advance notice, and the menu changed according to seasonal ingredients. The morning was bright. The air smelled of freshly ground coffee and artisanal pastries. "Not so secret anymore," Danielle responded, trying to sound casual. "Veronica's being more open about our relationship." "Really?" Ellen arched a perfectly lined eyebrow. "That doesn't sound like the Veronica I know. She's the most private person I've met. We've worked together for 12 years, and I barely know anything personal about her." Veronica, seated between them both, took a sip of her mimosa with studied calm. "Things change, Ellen," she said. "People change." Ellen didn't sound convinced. "And how exactly did you two meet? Veronica was very vague when she told me." Danielle felt the weight of both gazes on her. This was another exam, another opportunity to ruin everything. "At an art exhibition," she answered, remembering the story they'd rehearsed. "A year ago, I was restoring some pieces for the museum and Veronica was considering acquiring a similar work." "And it was love at first sight, I suppose," Ellen said, with a tone that walked the line between sarcasm and genuine curiosity. "No," Danielle answered honestly. "At first I thought she was intimidating, maybe a bit arrogant." Veronica looked at her with surprise. Ellen let out a laugh. "Well, at least you're honest," Ellen said. "Most people lie in these situations. They say everything was perfect from the start." "Nothing is perfect from the start," Danielle continued, feeling the words flow more naturally. "But she intrigued me. There was something about her, a loneliness I recognized, because I was lonely too." The silence that followed was dense. Veronica looked at her plate with an expression difficult to read. Ellen observed Danielle with renewed interest. "Interesting," Ellen murmured. "Maybe Veronica did find someone who understands her after all." The rest of brunch was less tense. Ellen talked about a real estate project in Connecticut. Veronica discussed a possible investment in an emerging gallery in Chelsea. And Danielle mainly listened, learning how this world of money and power worked. When they finally said goodbye and returned to the car, Veronica didn't speak for the first 5 minutes of the drive. "Did I say something wrong?" Danielle finally asked. Veronica looked at her. "No, you said exactly the right thing," she responded. Ellen is skeptical by nature. If you'd sounded too perfect, she wouldn't have believed anything. But that answer, about loneliness, that was smart. "It wasn't strategy," Danielle admitted. "It was truth." Veronica was silent for a moment. "I know," she finally said, so quietly Danielle barely heard her. The following weeks fell into a strange routine. Danielle spent her days at the museum, restoring 18th century paintings, mixing pigments, reconstructing damaged canvases. It was her refuge, the only place where she still felt like herself. But the nights belonged to Veronica. Dinners at exclusive restaurants where Danielle learned to recognize the difference between a Bordeaux and a Burgundy. Gallery openings where she pretended to understand contemporary art that frankly seemed pretentious to her. Dinners at home where Veronica reviewed contracts while Danielle read novels on the couch. They were becoming comfortable with each other. And that scared Danielle. "Tell me something real," Danielle said one night while they were at home. It was Friday. They'd attended a particularly boring business dinner with German investors who only talked about bonds and emerging markets. Now they were in the living room, Veronica with a glass of red wine, Danielle with chamomile tea. "Something real?" Veronica repeated. "Yes, something that's not part of your public image. Something you wouldn't tell Ellen or any of those sharks in suits," Danielle explained. "If we're going to live together, pretend to be wives, we should at least get to know each other a bit." Veronica studied her for a long moment. Why do you want to know? Because I'm tired of masks, Danielle responded. You wear one all day. I'm learning to wear mine. But here, now, with nobody watching, can't we just be real people? Veronica took a long sip of her wine. Okay, she finally said. Ask. Why do you never talk about your family? Veronica's expression immediately hardened. That's a complicated question. We have time. Veronica leaned back against the sofa, looking up at the ceiling. My family didn't approve of who I am, she said in a carefully neutral voice. My father was a traditional man, strict Catholic. When I was 23 and finally told him I was a lesbian, he gave me 2 options: fix myself or leave. Danielle felt a knot in her throat. What did you do? I left, Veronica answered. With a suitcase, $500 in cash, and no plan. It was the hardest and best decision I've ever made in my life. And your mom? Siblings? My mother chose my father over me. I have a younger brother I haven't seen in 13 years, Veronica said. And for the first time, Danielle heard real emotion in her voice. That's why I built all this. To prove to them they didn't need me as much as they thought. To prove to myself I could survive alone. You're not alone, Danielle said before she could stop herself. Veronica looked at her with a vulnerable expression Danielle had never seen. I'm not? Well, you have me, Danielle hurried to clarify. I mean, it's temporary and all, but for these 6 months, you're not completely alone. Something changed in Veronica's eyes. They softened, and when she smiled, it was genuine. Thank you, she murmured. That means more than you know. They stayed like that, looking at each other in the warm silence of the living room, and Danielle felt something move in her chest, something dangerous and confusing. The moment broke when Veronica's phone rang. Veronica checked it, and her expression changed instantly. What's wrong? Danielle asked. Richard, Veronica answered, showing her the screen. It was a message. We need to talk about your marital situation. There are things you should know. Danielle felt a chill run down her back. What does that mean? It means he's investigating, Veronica answered, her voice returning to that cold, controlled tone. Shit. Can he discover the truth? I don't know, Veronica admitted. But if he's looking, he'll eventually find something. We need to be more careful. More careful? Veronica, we already live together, attend events together, act like a couple all the time. What more can we do? Veronica looked at her with an expression difficult to interpret. Convince everyone this is real. Completely real. No doubts, no cracks in the story. How? Veronica was silent for a long moment. By giving them something to believe in, she finally answered. Something that makes no one dare to question whether we're a couple or not. Danielle felt a knot of apprehension in her stomach. What do you have in mind? But Veronica just shook her head. Let me think about it. For now, we need to be more attentive. Richard is dangerous when he suspects something. That night, Danielle couldn't sleep. She lay awake staring at her room's ceiling, thinking about Richard's message, about the vulnerability she'd seen in Veronica, about how each passing day felt less like acting and more like something real. And that terrified her, because falling in love with Veronica Sterling wasn't in the contract, and it definitely wasn't in her plans. 3 days later, Danielle understood what Veronica had meant by giving them something to believe in. They were at a charity gala at the Met, a massive event with politicians, business people, and celebrities. Danielle wore a midnight blue dress that Veronica had insisted on buying, and she felt like an imposter among so much luxury. Veronica, as always, was the center of attention. She wore a white suit with perfectly cut pants and a blazer that accentuated her figure. She moved through the room like it was her kingdom, introducing Danielle to dozens of people whose net worth exceeded some small country's GDPs. Then Danielle saw him. Richard Donovan was across the salon, talking with a group of older men, but his eyes were fixed on Veronica and Danielle, watching, evaluating, looking for cracks. Veronica noticed too. "I need you to trust me," Veronica murmured in Danielle's ear, her breath warm against her skin. "What are you going to do?" "Something I should have done before," Veronica answered. Before Danielle could ask what that meant, Veronica took her hand and led her to the center of the salon. The string quartet's music filled the air. Some couples were dancing in an improvised space. "Veronica, I don't know how to waltz. Follow my lead," Veronica interrupted, placing a hand on Danielle's waist and taking her other hand. "Just follow me." And then they began to dance. Danielle was clumsy at first, stepping on Veronica's feet, moving out of rhythm. But Veronica guided her patiently, whispering instructions, adjusting her posture with gentle touches. "Relax," Veronica murmured. "You're tense." "Everyone's watching us," Danielle responded. "I know, that's the point." Danielle looked up and met Veronica's eyes. They were so close she could see the small golden specks in the dark brown of her irises. She could smell her perfume, something expensive and subtly floral. "Why are we doing this?" Danielle asked in a low voice. "Because Richard is watching," Veronica answered, "and he needs to see that we're real, that what we have is genuine." But it's not. Something hurt crossed Veronica's eyes. "Isn't it?" she asked. "Then you're a better actress than I thought." The music continued. They turned slowly under the Met's chandeliers, surrounded by curious gazes. Danielle realized she was no longer stepping on Veronica's feet. They had synchronized, moving as if they'd danced together hundreds of times before. "Veronica," Danielle began, not knowing what she wanted to say. "Shh," Veronica brought her face closer. "Just dance with me." And Danielle did. She allowed herself to get lost in the moment, in the warmth of Veronica's body against hers, in the way their hands fit perfectly, in how the world seemed to fade until it was just the two of them. When the music ended, there was polite applause. Veronica slowly released Danielle, but kept her hand. "Well done," she murmured. Danielle looked around the salon. Richard was still watching them, but his expression had changed. There was no more skepticism, just acceptance, maybe even a touch of defeat. Veronica had won this round. But as they returned to their table, Danielle realized something terrifying. During those 3 minutes dancing, she hadn't been acting. And she suspected Veronica hadn't been either. If any part of this story resembles your life, the hype button helps keep it from staying silent. The following week, everything changed. Danielle arrived at the museum on a Monday morning and found her supervisor, Laura, waiting for her with a strange expression. "Danielle, we need to talk," Laura said. They sat in the small office Laura shared with 2 other conservators. Laura closed the door, which was never a good sign. "Did something happen?" Danielle asked. "I got a call yesterday from a private foundation," Laura explained. "They want to fund a major restoration, a collection of 19th century murals in critical condition. That's great, isn't it?" "Yes, but it has conditions." Laura looked at her directly. "They specifically requested that you lead the project." Danielle blinked, confused. "Me? Why me?" "That was my question too," Laura said, And when I investigated a bit, I discovered the foundation funding this belongs to Veronica Sterling. Danielle's stomach sank. Laura, I can explain. Are you her wife? Laura interrupted. Danielle opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. The lie was there, ready. But something in Laura's expression, disappointment mixed with concern, stopped her. Yes, she finally murmured. Laura sighed deeply. Danielle, do you have any idea how this looks? It seems like influence peddling. Like you're using your personal connection to get projects. I didn't ask for this, Danielle protested. I didn't even know she was going to do something like this. But she did. And now I have to decide whether to accept this funding knowing it comes with complications, Laura said. This project could be amazing for the museum, but it could also compromise your professional integrity. Danielle felt anger starting to burn in her chest. Veronica had done this without consulting her. She'd crossed a line without her permission. Give me a day, Danielle requested. Let me talk to her and clarify this. Laura nodded slowly. Okay, but Danielle, be careful. People like Veronica Sterling play in different leagues, and sometimes normal people like us end up being collateral damage. Danielle left the museum trembling with fury. She called Veronica immediately. Hello, darling, Veronica answered in a casual tone. Is everything okay? No, Danielle answered brusquely. What the hell did you do? There was a pause. What are you talking about? The museum project, the funding from your foundation. What were you thinking? Danielle's voice rose. You can't just use your money to manipulate my professional life. I'm not manipulating anything, Veronica responded, her voice turning cold. I saw an opportunity to help you. I thought you'd appreciate it. Help me? By making me look like a nepotist who gets jobs because she's married to you? Danielle laughed bitterly. Thanks, but I don't need that kind of help. You're overreacting. No, you're minimizing, Danielle interrupted. This is my career, Veronica. The only thing I have that's truly mine. And you just contaminated it. The silence on the other end was long and tense. I'll cancel the funding, Veronica finally said, her voice strained. No, that'll just make it look worse. Danielle pressed the bridge of her nose. Just ask me next time, before you do something that affects my life. Okay, Veronica agreed in a low voice. I'm sorry. Danielle hung up without responding. She sat on a park bench across from the museum, trying to calm her breathing. What was she doing? She'd gotten into this agreement for money, with clear rules and established boundaries. But every day those boundaries were becoming blurrier. Veronica was invading her life in ways she hadn't anticipated. And the worst part was that part of her, a small but growing part, wanted to let her in. That night, when Danielle returned to the mansion, Veronica was waiting for her in the living room. I talked to the museum, Veronica said before Danielle could speak. I changed the funding terms. It's no longer conditional on you leading the project. The decision is completely theirs, and if they choose you, it'll be for your merit, not our connection. Danielle sat on the couch across from her. Thank you, she said after a moment. You're right, Veronica continued. I shouldn't have done that without consulting you. I'm used to fixing problems with money, to arranging things, but you're not a problem that needs fixing. No, Danielle agreed. I'm not. They looked at each other for a long moment. There was something different in the air between them. An honesty that hadn't existed before. Can we start over? Veronica asked. With better boundaries, More communication. Danielle nodded. I'd like that. Veronica smiled, and it was one of those rare, genuine smiles that made Danielle's heart beat faster. Good, Veronica said, because it turns out I'm getting used to having you around. Danielle felt warmth in her cheeks. Me too, she admitted. And there it was. The truth neither of them dared to say completely. This had become real. Not in the way they pretended in public, but in a deeper, more complicated way. A way that wasn't in the contract. And neither of them knew what to do about it. The museum project turned out to be exactly what Danielle needed to maintain her sanity. Laura finally accepted the funding, with Veronica's new conditions, and after a careful review of several restorers' credentials, chose Danielle to lead the project. It was a decision based purely on merit, and that made the victory sweeter. The murals were in an abandoned church in Queens. 3 enormous panels dating from 1880, depicting religious scenes with incredible detail. They were peeling, discolored, damaged by decades of humidity and neglect. It would be months of work, maybe a year. Danielle immersed herself in the project with fervor. It gave her a perfect excuse to spend less time at the mansion, less time pretending, less time getting confused about what she felt for Veronica. But Veronica, apparently, had other plans. One Friday afternoon, Danielle was working on scaffolding, carefully removing layers of oxidized varnish from one of the murals, when she heard footsteps behind her. "Impressive," said a familiar voice. Danielle almost dropped her brush. She turned and saw Veronica standing in the center of the abandoned church, looking up with genuine admiration. "What are you doing here?" Danielle asked, climbing down from the scaffolding. "I wanted to see what you were working on," Veronica answered, without taking her eyes off the murals. "I'm serious. This is impressive, Danielle." Danielle felt unexpected pride swell in her chest. "Thanks. They're going to be beautiful when I'm done." "They already are," Veronica said, finally looking at her. "And you look happy here." Danielle realized it was true. Here, covered in plaster dust and pigment stains, holding tools she knew better than herself, she felt at home. "This is my world," she explained. "Not galas or expensive restaurants. This." "I know," Veronica responded with a small smile. "That's why I came. To see the real Danielle Reed. The one who exists when she's not pretending to be my wife." The words hurt more than they should have. "And? What do you think?" Veronica approached, looking at her with an intensity that made the air feel denser. "I think I like this version as much as the other," she said. "Maybe more." Danielle swallowed, feeling too exposed under that gaze. "Veronica, I have a proposal," Veronica interrupted. "This weekend, no events, no performances, just the two of us. I want to take you somewhere." "Where?" "It's a surprise," Veronica smiled. "Do you trust me?" Danielle should have said no. She should have maintained boundaries, remembered this was temporary, that it had an expiration date. But instead, she heard herself saying, "Yes." Saturday morning, the driver picked them up at 8. Veronica refused to tell Danielle where they were going, just asked her to pack comfortable clothes for 2 days. They drove for 3 hours north on the highway. Danielle watched the landscape change from urban to rural, mountains appearing on the horizon, the air becoming fresher. "Are we going to the Catskills?" Danielle asked. "Further," Veronica answered, looking out the window with a pensive expression. Finally, they arrived at a small town in the Hudson Valley. Cobblestone streets, colonial houses with white picket fences, a central square with a historic church. The kind of place where time seemed to move slower. The driver dropped them off in front of a modest but well-kept house on the outskirts of town. It had white clapboard siding, a garden with climbing roses, and views of the mountains. "What is this place?" Danielle asked as they got out of the car. "It belonged to my grandmother," Veronica answered quietly. "The only person in my family who accepted me when I came out. She died 5 years ago and left me this house." Danielle looked at her surprised. In all these months, Veronica had never mentioned her grandmother. "Why did you bring me here?" Veronica opened the house door with an old key. "Because you said you wanted to know the real person behind the mask," she answered. "Well, this house is the only part of my life that's still completely mine. No pretense, no performances." The interior was simple but cozy. Dark wood furniture, hand-woven rugs, black and white photographs on the walls. It smelled of old wood and dried lavender. Veronica walked to one of the photographs. It was of an elderly woman with white hair pulled back in a bun, smiling broadly. Next to her was a much younger Veronica, maybe 20, also smiling. "Her name was Catherine," Veronica said, touching the frame with gentle fingers. "When my father kicked me out, she called me. She told me I'd always have a home with her. I lived here for a year while I found my way." "She looks like an amazing woman," Danielle commented. "She was," Veronica smiled sadly. "She taught me that being different wasn't a curse. It was a gift. That people who couldn't accept me didn't deserve to have me in their lives." Danielle felt a lump in her throat. "Why don't you ever come here?" "Because it hurts," Veronica admitted. "She was the only person who really knew me, who loved me unconditionally. When she died, I felt like the only good part of my past had gone with her." Danielle approached, and without thinking, took Veronica's hand. "But she's here," she said, pointing to the photographs, the furniture, the things that clearly had been loved. "She's still here, in the things she taught you, in the person you are." Veronica looked at her with shining eyes. "Sometimes I wonder who I'd be if she were still alive," Veronica murmured. "If I'd be less cold, less controlling." "You're not cold," Danielle said. "You just protect your heart. That's different." Veronica laughed softly, but it was a sad sound. "You see me in a way nobody else does." "Maybe because I really look," Danielle answered. "Not just at the image you project." They looked at each other for a long, charged moment. Veronica was still holding Danielle's hand, her thumb tracing small circles on her skin. "Thank you," Veronica murmured, "for coming here. For listening." "Always," Danielle responded, and realized she meant it. They spent the rest of the day exploring the town. They walked through the local farmer's market where Veronica bought fresh apples and artisan cheese from a vendor who recognized her and greeted her warmly. They had lunch at a small diner with plastic tables and the best apple pie Danielle had ever tasted. They sat in the town square and watched kids play while the sun began to set. It was the most relaxed version of Veronica that Danielle had seen. No perfect makeup, no designer clothes, no constant mask of control. Just a woman in jeans and a white t-shirt, smiling in the sun. "You should come here more often," Danielle said as they walked back to the house. "Maybe I will," Veronica answered, "especially if you come with me." Danielle felt butterflies in her stomach. "Veronica, we need to talk about this," she said, stopping on the path. "This?" "Whatever's happening between us." Danielle took a deep breath. "It's not just acting anymore, is it?" Veronica was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "No, it's not." "What are we going to do about it?" "I don't know," Veronica admitted. "The contract says 6 months. After that, we're supposed to separate, go back to our lives. But I don't know if I want that anymore," Danielle finished. Veronica looked at her with a vulnerable and hopeful expression at the same time. Neither do I. They stood in the middle of the dirt road, mountains around them painted orange and purple by the sunset. The world seemed to have stopped. "What do we do then?" Danielle asked. Veronica approached, lifting a hand to gently caress Danielle's face. "Maybe we stop pretending," she murmured, "and see what happens when it's real." Danielle's heart beat so loudly she was sure Veronica could hear it. "I'm scared," Danielle admitted. "Me too," Veronica confessed. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe the things worth having are scary." Danielle closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of Veronica's hand against her cheek. When she opened them again, Veronica was still there, looking at her like she was something precious. "Okay," Danielle whispered. "Let's stop pretending." Veronica smiled, a complete, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. And in that moment, Danielle knew she'd crossed a point of no return. She was no longer pretending to be Veronica's wife. She was falling in love with her. And that changed absolutely everything. That night they had dinner at the house. Veronica cooked, something that completely surprised Danielle, a simple but delicious pot roast she'd learned from her grandmother. "I didn't know you could cook," Danielle commented as they ate at the small kitchen table. "There are many things you don't know about me," Veronica responded with a mysterious smile. "But we have time to discover them." After dinner, they sat on the small back porch. The night was clear, full of stars you never saw in New York City. The air smelled of damp earth and night flowers. "Tell me something about you," Veronica asked. "Something you've never told anyone." Danielle thought for a moment. "When I was a child, my mother died of cancer," she began. "I was 8. My father never knew how to deal with grief, so he buried himself in work. I basically grew up alone. And I think that's why I became a restorer." "How so?" "Because restoration is fixing broken things, returning them to their original beauty, giving them a second chance," Danielle explained. "I think on some level, I've always wanted to do that with people too. Find something broken and help it heal." Veronica looked at her with a tenderness that made Danielle's heart ache. "Is that what you're doing with me? Trying to fix me?" "No," Danielle answered honestly. "Because I don't think you're broken. Just hurt. And that's different." Veronica blinked rapidly, and Danielle realized she was trying not to cry. "No one's ever said that to me before," Veronica murmured. Danielle moved closer, taking Veronica's hand in hers. "Well, someone should have said it a long time ago." They stayed like that, hands intertwined under the stars, and Danielle felt something fundamentally shift between them. They were no longer two strangers pretending. They were no longer just a business agreement. They were something more, something real and frighteningly fragile. "Danielle?" Veronica said after a long silence. "Yes? When the contract ends, what will happen to us?" Danielle felt the weight of the question. 3 more months. That's all that was left of their original agreement. "I don't know," she admitted. "But maybe it doesn't have to end. Not really." "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I want to see where this goes," Danielle interrupted. "Without contracts, without performances, just us, being real." The smile that lit up Veronica's face was the most beautiful thing Danielle had ever seen in her life. "I'd like that," Veronica whispered. And there, under a sky full of stars in a small town in the mountains, Danielle and Veronica allowed themselves to imagine a future together. A future that wasn't written in any contract. A future they'd build themselves. But what neither of them knew was that Veronica's past was about to catch up with them. And when it did, everything they'd built would be in danger. Sunday afternoon, they returned to New York City. The drive back was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. Danielle looked out the window, feeling like she'd left something important in those mountains. Part of her fear, part of her doubts. When they arrived at the mansion on the Upper East Side, there was a white envelope waiting at the door. Veronica picked it up, frowning. "What is it?" Danielle asked. Veronica opened the envelope. Inside were photographs. Danielle saw the color disappear from Veronica's face. "Veronica, what's wrong?" Veronica handed her the photographs with trembling hands. They were old photos. Of Veronica, but much younger. Maybe 22 or 23. She was with another woman, dark-haired, beautiful, smiling. The photos were intimate, hugging, kissing, clearly in love. There was an attached note. "Interesting that your wife doesn't know about Lucy. What else doesn't she know? We need to talk. RD." Danielle felt her stomach sink. "Who's Lucy?" Veronica closed her eyes, her face a mask of pain. "My first love," she answered with a broken voice, "and the biggest mistake of my life." Danielle looked at the photographs scattered across the living room coffee table. Each showed a version of Veronica she'd never known. Younger, more vulnerable, smiling with a freedom she no longer had, and always with that woman. Lucy. Veronica stood by the window, looking out at the darkness of the Upper East Side. She hadn't spoken in 5 minutes. "I need you to tell me who she is," Danielle finally said, her voice firmer than she felt. "And why Richard has these photos." Veronica exhaled slowly, as if she'd been holding her breath. "Lucy Morrison," she began without turning around. "I met her when I was 23. I just left my family. I was living with my grandmother in Hudson Valley, working whatever jobs I could find. She owned a small bookstore in town." "Did you fall in love?" "Madly," Veronica admitted with a hoarse voice. "She was the first person I could be completely myself with. No masks, no pretense, just Veronica. Not the businesswoman, not the rejected heiress. Just a woman in love." Danielle felt a stab of jealousy that surprised her. "What happened?" Veronica finally turned around. She had tears in her eyes, but she wasn't letting them fall. "I got my first big business opportunity. An investment in New York City that could change my life. But it meant leaving Hudson Valley. Leaving my grandmother. Leaving Lucy," she explained. "I asked her to come with me, to build a life together in the city. And she said no." Veronica's voice broke. "She said the city would change me, that money and power would corrupt me, that I'd stop being the person she'd fallen in love with. Was she right?" Veronica laughed bitterly. "Maybe. I left anyway, built my empire, became exactly what she feared. And when I returned 5 years later, successful and powerful, to prove to her she'd been wrong." "What happened?" "She was married," Veronica murmured. "To a local teacher. They had a daughter. A simple, happy life. Exactly what she'd always wanted. And when she saw me, she told me I'd become a stranger, that she'd been right not to follow me." Danielle felt her heart break for Veronica. "Why does Richard have these photos?" "Because Lucy was his niece," Veronica answered, and Danielle felt everything fall into place. "Richard always knew about our relationship. He disapproved, thought I was a bad influence. When I started becoming successful, he tried to use our past story to blackmail me. He wanted me to invest in his projects in exchange for his silence." "And did you?" "No." Veronica shook her head. "I told him to go to hell, that I didn't care if the world knew I was a lesbian, that I had nothing left to lose. But now you have a fake wife, Danielle finished. "And if he exposes the truth about Lucy, our story falls apart." "Exactly," Veronica confirmed. "He can say I hired you, that everything's a charade, and he'd be right." Danielle got up from the couch, approaching Veronica. "What does he want? Money?" "He wants me to partner with him," Veronica explained. "He has a massive real estate project. He needs my name, my contacts, my capital. If I refuse, he threatens to expose everything." "And if he exposes us, how bad would it be?" Veronica looked at her sadly. "For me, professionally, it would be manageable. I'm powerful enough to survive a scandal. But you, Danielle, if the truth comes out, your reputation would be destroyed. You'd look like you sold yourself for money, like you're an opportunist who took advantage of a rich woman." Danielle felt a chill. "I have to face him," Veronica said. "Tomorrow. I'll tell him yes to his proposal." "No," Danielle responded firmly. "We're not going to let him blackmail us. What other option do we have?" Danielle took Veronica's hands in hers. "Tell the truth," she proposed. "Before he can use it as a weapon. We control the narrative. We tell it our way." "Danielle, that's social suicide. Or it's freedom," Danielle interrupted. "Think about it, Veronica. You've spent your whole life hiding behind masks, protecting your image, fearing someone will see who you really are. Aren't you tired?" Veronica looked at her with shining eyes. "I'm exhausted," she admitted, "but I'm scared." "Me too," Danielle confessed. "But let's do it together. Really this time. Not as a business agreement. As whatever we are now." "And what are we?" Veronica asked with a trembling voice. Danielle moved closer until their foreheads almost touched. "Two women who started pretending and ended up finding each other," she answered. "That's what we are." Veronica let out a sob she'd been holding in, and Danielle hugged her. They stayed like that for long minutes, Veronica trembling against her, finally allowing herself to be vulnerable. "I don't know how to do this," Veronica murmured against Danielle's shoulder. "Be real, be honest. Let someone see me completely." "We'll learn together," Danielle promised, step by step. When Veronica finally pulled away, her eyes were red, but there was a new determination in her expression. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it. Let's tell the truth. But we do it together, right?" "Together," Danielle agreed. They kissed then. It was their first real kiss. Not for cameras, not for audiences, just for themselves. It was soft and tender, and full of unspoken promises. When they separated, both were smiling. "We're going to need a good lawyer," Veronica said. "You already have one," Danielle responded. "And I have a journalist friend who owes me a favor. We can control how this story is told." Always thinking several steps ahead, Veronica caressed Danielle's face. "When did you become so brave?" "Since I met someone worth being brave for," Danielle answered. They spent that night planning. They called Veronica's lawyer, who immediately began preparing a legal statement. Danielle contacted her friend Sophie, a journalist from a respected digital media outlet, who agreed to write the story from their perspective. The strategy was simple. Get ahead of Richard. Publish an exclusive interview where they explained the truth, that they'd started with a business agreement, but had truly fallen in love. Show vulnerability, honesty, the real emotional journey. "People forgive many things if you're honest," Sophie explained via video call. "What they don't forgive is continued hypocrisy. If you tell the story first, in your own words, the narrative is yours." "What about my professional reputation?" Danielle asked. "It'll take a hit temporarily," Sophie admitted. But if we frame this as a story of two women finding love in unusual circumstances, if we show your work, your talent, your professional independence, people will get over it, especially your arts community. They're more open than the corporate world. And my empire? Veronica asked. Business is business, Sophie answered. You might lose some conservative investors, but you'll also gain respect for being authentic. And frankly, Veronica, your track record speaks for itself. You're too good at what you do for a romantic scandal to destroy you. After the call, Danielle and Veronica sat in silence for a moment. We can still back out, Veronica said. I can give Richard what he wants. Nobody ever has to know the truth. But we'd know, Danielle responded. And we'd spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, waiting for the next blackmail to come. That's not living, Veronica. Veronica nodded slowly. You're right, as always. Not always, Danielle smiled. Just when it matters. The interview with Sophie was published 3 days later. The headline was, Behind the Charade, How a Business Agreement Became Real Love. The interview was extensive, honest, and surprisingly intimate. Veronica talked about Richard's harassment, about her fear of vulnerability, about how her industry's rules had forced her to build walls. Danielle talked about accepting the agreement out of financial necessity, about discovering the real person behind Veronica's public image, about how love had arrived when she least expected it. They included photos, some from public events but also private photos, Danielle working on the murals, Veronica cooking at her grandmother's house, the two walking through Hudson Valley without makeup, without poses, just being themselves. The reaction was mixed. Some media criticized them harshly. Romantic fraud, public manipulation, two women playing with sacred institutions. But others defended them. Love found in unexpected places, the courage of honesty, two women defying outdated social norms. Social media exploded. Hashtags for and against. Heated debates about ethics, love, and authenticity. The museum where Danielle worked issued a statement. While we do not approve of the initial circumstances of Ms. Reed's agreement, we recognize her professional talent and contribution to the field of art restoration. Her work speaks for itself. Veronica's business partners reacted variably. Some cut ties immediately. Others, surprisingly, expressed respect for her honesty. Ellen Caldwell called personally. I knew there was something, Ellen said, but I don't care how it started. What matters is you're finally being yourself, and that's worth more than any contract. Richard Donovan also reacted. He tried to publish the photos of Lucy anyway, trying to paint Veronica as a chronic manipulator. But Veronica's lawyer was already prepared, threatened lawsuits for harassment, blackmail, and defamation. It turned out Richard had his own skeletons in the closet, tax evasion, questionable business practices that he didn't want exposed. He backed down, defeated, muttering empty threats he'd never materialize. A month later, things began to calm down. Danielle continued working on the murals. Some colleagues treated her differently, suspicious looks, whispers in hallways. But others supported her. Her work was undeniable. The murals she was restoring were becoming spectacular. Veronica lost some contracts but gained others. Younger, more progressive investors saw her honesty as an asset. She's authentic, they said. You know what you get with her. And personally, they were happier than they'd ever been. There were no more performances, no more masks. Just two women building something real, step by step. One afternoon, Danielle was working at the church when Veronica appeared again. But this time she didn't come alone. She brought a picnic basket. I thought you needed a break, Veronica said. They sat on the floor of the abandoned church, sharing sandwiches and white wine, surrounded by the partially restored murals. You know what's ironic? Danielle said. I started this for money, to get out of debt, to have financial stability, and now I have that. Danielle smiled. The museum project pays well. My debts are cleared. I have savings for the first time in my life. I achieved everything I wanted. Then why are you still here? Veronica asked quietly. With me. The contract ended weeks ago. You're free to leave. Danielle took Veronica's hand. Because I discovered what I really wanted wasn't money, she answered. It was this. It was you. It was finding someone who really saw me and who let me see her too. Veronica smiled, and it was that complete, genuine smile Danielle loved. You know what you once told me? Veronica asked. That if I did it well enough, the acting would become truth. I remember. You were right, Veronica said. We acted so well it became real. Or maybe it was always real, and we just needed time to realize it. They kissed there, under the sacred images of the murals, in that church that had seen so much love and loss over the centuries. 2 weeks later, Veronica surprised her. They were back at the grandmother's house in Hudson Valley. They'd decided to make it their regular refuge, a place where they could escape the city's noise, the opinions, everything except each other. It was sunset. They were on the back porch, exactly where they'd been that memorable night months ago. Veronica suddenly stood up. What's wrong? Danielle asked. There's something I need to ask you, Veronica said. She knelt down, and Danielle felt her heart stop. Danielle Reed, Veronica began. We met in the strangest way possible. We signed a contract that made us pretend something neither of us expected would become real. But every day with you has taught me that love isn't something you can plan or control. You can only choose it. She opened a small velvet box. Inside were 2 simple but beautiful rings. This isn't a contract, Veronica continued, her voice breaking. It's a promise, a choice I make freely. Will you marry me? For real this time? Danielle dropped to her knees in front of her, tears running down her cheeks. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. They kissed, laughing and crying at the same time. There were no cameras, no audience, just the 2 of them, choosing each other. When they separated, Veronica slid the ring onto Danielle's finger. You know we're going to have to actually get married now, right? Danielle said. Like, legally? I already scheduled an appointment at City Hall for next week, Veronica responded with a smile. If you want something bigger later, we can do it. But first I want it to be official, real, no contracts. Perfect, Danielle kissed her again. Absolutely perfect. The wedding at City Hall was small. Just Ellen as Veronica's witness, and Morgan as Danielle's witness. No galas, no crowds, just a judge, a legal document, and 2 women promising each other true love. When they left City Hall as legitimate wives, there were photographers waiting outside. But this time, instead of hiding, Veronica took Danielle's hand and smiled for the cameras. Any statement, Ms. Sterling? A reporter shouted. Veronica looked at Danielle, then at the cameras. Yes, she answered. That sometimes love arrives in the most unexpected ways, and when you find it, it's worth any price. Price? Another reporter asked. Vulnerability, Danielle responded. Honesty, risk. But all of that is small compared to what you gain. The photographs from that moment ended up in all the newspapers. But this time, the captions were different. It was no longer a scandal. It was a love story. 6 months later, they were back at Grandmother Catherine's house in Hudson Valley. They decided to make that place their refuge, a reminder of where it had all really begun. Not at the VIP party, not in the contract, But in that moment when Veronica had lowered her walls and let Danielle in, they were sitting on the back porch, watching the stars, exactly like that night almost a year ago. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" Danielle asked. "Never," Veronica admitted. "When I proposed that agreement to you, I was only thinking about surviving, about keeping the sharks away, about protecting my empire. And now?" Veronica smiled, taking Danielle's hand. "Now, I'm thinking about building something more important than an empire. I'm thinking about building a life with you." Danielle rested her head on Veronica's shoulder. "You know people still talk about us, right? About how it all started." "Let them talk," Veronica responded. "In the end, only what matters is that we know the truth. And the truth is, I love you. Completely. Unconditionally. No contracts." "I love you too," Danielle murmured. "My billionaire wife I crashed into." Veronica laughed. "Technically, I hired you." "Details don't matter," Danielle joked. "What matters is the happy ending." "Ending?" Veronica arched an eyebrow. "Danielle Reed Sterling, this is just the beginning." And as the stars shone above them in that quiet town in the mountains, two women who had found each other through lies but had chosen truth kissed under the infinite sky. Because sometimes the best love stories begin with the most improbable agreements, and sometimes pretending leads you to the most real thing you'll ever find. If you want the continuation of this story, write it in the comments, because that's the only way I'll know what you want. And don't forget that YouTube only prioritizes subscribers. So subscribe now so you don't miss the next story that will make you believe in love and second chances. This is just the beginning. See you soon.